Hi everybody, how you doing? Welcome back. Glad you're watching another video. Um, this one's going to be about the brain. There's going to be two videos on the brain. This is part one. You should watch them both. Got a joke for you to start out. Here it is. So an alien from Mars lands on Earth and he wants to research the brain. He walks into a brain shop and he points and he says, "How much is that brain over there?" And the shop owner says, "Well, that's a monkey brain. It's worth $20, or it costs $20. He says, "No, no, I don't want a monkey brain." He says, "How much is that brain over there?" And he goes, "Well, that's a female brain, and that brain's worth $100. And the alien says, "Okay, well, what about this one over there?" And the shop owner says, "That's a $500 brain. It's a male brain." And the alien says, "Well, why is it so expensive?" And the shop owner says, "Well, it's hardly been used." Okay, let's see. On to our presentation. In this presentation, part one, we're going to talk about the older parts of the brain, and I'm going to call that the reptilian parts of the brain. And then we're going to talk about the mammalian parts of the brain that mammals have. And we're going to talk about tools to study the brain. So three things: reptilian brain, mammalian brain, and tools. So the oldest brain structure is called the brain stem, and it's this part that's highlighted. It's not all of this outer tissue. It's this darker part that comes up to the interior of the brain. What does it do? It starts with where the spinal cord is. It's responsible for automatic survival functions. So one part on it, the medulla, this part down here close to the brainstem, that controls heartbeat and breathing. So medulla controls the heartbeat and breathing. So we call this part the reptilian because all reptiles have this part of the brain, as well as us. But it's an old part in terms of evolution. It evolved a long time ago. You also have the thalamus, which is up here on this top part. Again, this portion of the brain would be up the middle inside of the brain. The thalamus is the sensory switchboard located on top of the brainstem. It directs messages to the sensory areas in the cortex and transmits replies to the cerebellum and the medulla. So it's getting messages coming in and it's sending messages going out. So that's why it's called a switchboard, like an old-fashioned telephone switchboard way back like 80 years ago. Next part is the reticular formation. You can see where it's pointing to in here. It's the nerve network in the brainstem that plays an important role in controlling arousal. So reticular formation, you want to remember arousal. The cerebellum, this is a view of the brain from the underneath. Here's the spinal cord coming up. And on the bottom of the brain are these two structures, one on each side, called the cerebellum. Sometimes it's called the little brain. It helps coordinate voluntary movements and balance. So all of your movements of your body, walking, using your arms to throw a frisbee, and all your balance comes from the cerebellum. Okay, what about studying the brain? Let's take a break from the brain parts, studying the brain. One way we study the brain, psychologists study the brain, is to use a lesion. So you can, on experimental animals, you don't do this on people, but you can purposefully damage part of the brain or cut part of the brain out, and then you can see how that affects the animal's behavior or mood. And if something changes, then you can assume that that part of the brain that was damaged or removed, that part is involved in whatever change you saw. You can also do clinical observations. This is if you know someone has had a stroke and the stroke was on their brain right up on the exterior of the brain right up here, and then you notice some change in their mood or behavior, then you can assume that that part of the brain was involved in whatever the change you see. You can also do an EEG. The long name is electroencephalogram. This is an amplified recording of the electrical waves in the brain, and you can measure it like this little girl. She has things placed on the outside of her brain. These are just like glued to her brain with like a glue that's safe for the body, and they can measure what's going on. So there's nothing going into her brain. It's just measuring on the outside. You can do a PET scan on a brain. This is positron emission tomography. It's a visual display of the brain activity that detects a radioactive form of glucose while the brain performs a given task. So with this, they inject, or maybe you drink it. I can't remember exactly how you get the radioactive liquid in your body, but it's harmless. It goes into the bloodstream and then it goes into your brain. And then when you're using part of your brain and they've got the scanner on, that part of the brain lights up. And so you can see what part of the brain is lighting up when a person's doing a given task. MRI is similar to that. You can see the brain scan in the bottom corner. It's showing you parts of the brain that are being altered. So this one uses magnetic fields and radio waves to produce computer-generated images that distinguish among different types of brain tissue. So this is, you're seeing the tissue of the brain. You're not seeing the electrical activity or the glucose, but you're seeing the tissue and you're looking for differences. This is pointing to a difference in a person with schizophrenia. This central part is different for the person with schizophrenia. Okay, there's one more part. Oh, nope, we're on to the limbic system. Okay, so the beginning of the video, we're talking about the brain stem coming up into the brain. The brain is all around it. The limbic system, if this was the brain, the limbic system is the structures of the brain right around the brain stem. So in this picture, you can see the blue, the yellow, the green, and the purple comprise the limbic system. Now I'm calling it the mammalian system because in terms of evolution in species that evolved through the millions of years, this came later than the brainstem. So it's primarily involved in emotions, is the main thing. So let's look at the different parts. The amygdala is linked to the emotions of fear and anger. So we need to remember with amygdala that it's involved in fear and anger. The hypothalamus is involved in hunger and thirst. It maintains activities like eating, drinking, body temperature, and control of emotions as well. One way to remember it is that the H in hypothalamus is for hunger, and the TH for thalamus is thirst. So hypo, hunger, thalamus, thirst. It's one way to remember that. We also have two parts. One's called the hippocampus. This is involved in processing memories. And the pituitary gland, which was on the last slide, it's this little dark blue piece right here. The pituitary gland is the master gland. We have lots of glands in our body. When the pituitary gland releases hormones, those hormones often go and affect other glands. One of the big things it regulates is growth. Okay, this is a lot of brain parts. We're going to wrap it up here in a second. The last thing I want to mention is that there's been some research on the hypothalamus and the limbic system. In this top picture, you can see an electrode is going into this rat's brain, and when it stimulates the hypothalamus, the rat will seek out additional stimulation. So it will run across this grid that will give it a mild, like a pleasant electrical shock. So when it's stimulating the hypothalamus, people call that the reward center. That's the place in our brain where it feels good to do certain things. That part of the brain is involved. The second rat down here also has something attached to its brain. When it's stimulating the limbic system, it will be more daring. It'll climb trees. It'll seek out adventure. And that's why this rat is climbing a tree, which is something rats normally do not do. Okay, that's it for this presentation. If you have any questions, see me in class.